space. There's certain services that are required, such as the provision of bedding, appliances, certain comforts. And this is usually where the short-term accommodation space gets complex, because so whether you buy your first property or you own multiple properties, one source of income aside from your traditional long-term leasing is short-term leasing. And that's quite intuitive. It's not completely out of this world, but people obviously don't have as much of an understanding of it as they would with long-term leasing. Now, why is that? It's simply because short-term leasing takes a little bit extra effort. Obviously, you're having guests, transient guests, that stay for temporary periods of time, and the services that you offer them normally include more than simply an open space. There's certain services that are required, such as the provision of bedding, appliances, certain comforts. And this is usually where the short-term accommodation space gets complex, because it is, number one, competitive. There are other individuals out there that offer quality products. You have to compete with them. You have to acquire your own clientele. They need to be willing and wanting to stay with you. You need to understand the platforms, and obviously that's a competitive market as well, because there's several platforms that a person can use when introducing the short-term accommodation. So all short-term accommodation means is it's not a fixed period like 6 months or a year. Typically, short-term accommodation would be overnight, a week. Traditionally, I would argue that anything less than 28 days would be short-term accommodation. I'll explain this to you in a second. And so short-term accommodation, you often hear the word Airbnb or Booking.com as interchangeable explanations on what short-term accommodation is. Reason for this is because these channels dominate the space. A person can actually get into short-term accommodation by simply using one channel like Airbnb. Now, you as a home buyer, why would this interest you? Why would this be of any relevance? Now, if you're buying a property and you're letting it out long-term, this offers you another option that you can utilize in order to extract income. But Airbnbs also work really well with structures or even your primary residence that you already have in place. So people very, very frequently rent out rooms. They rent out small quarters that people want to use to stay overnight. Maybe it's not appropriate for long-term guests, but somebody that simply wants a room and a kitchen, you might have the space to be able to do it. And this is where the concept of short-term accommodation works really, really well. And so obviously my job, being in the legal and tax space, is to just ensure that anyone that decides to look at doing something like this follows the correct steps. Now, from a legal and tax perspective, the first thing is when it comes to getting your permissions in place. So please remember that simply utilizing a property to rent out long term, that's permissible. You don't need to worry about zoning. You don't need to worry about the municipality. Unfortunately, when it comes to short-term accommodation, you have to ask the question whether there's any bylaws that you need to look at that govern short-term accommodation and that you need to adhere to. And this is especially so if you're running more than one short-term accommodation unit. So the zoning in particular, when it comes to short-term accommodation, is very, very, very important.